Hello, everybody, and welcome to our third roundtable session, which we're running on AI in the creative industries. Welcome to all of our speakers on the panel, and hello to everyone listening online. Hopefully, it will be quite an interesting conversation where we'll showcase quite a unique cross-section of a variety of the creative industries that we work in. We've got three key topics to talk around, including implementation, challenges and opportunities that AI, machine learning, deep learning all represent to our industries. Secondly, the ethical considerations of those things. And then finally, a little bit about what the future might hold and represent for us. And then hopefully looking forward to some time for some Q&A at the end. So anyone who's watching, please chuck in comments at any point, and we'll do a roundup before closing out and hopefully finish up in an hour. So introductions, keep them as brief as we can, but just to go through who everybody is, to start with a little bit on Mustard and who we are. So just a sort of a flavour for anyone who's unaware, Mustard are a global design recruiter with coverage across the UK, Europe, Hong Kong, Asia Pacific and the USA. We recruit into 6 key divisions, which I'll cover quickly now. So BE is our built environment division, which covers architecture, construction and developers. Interior design, ID covers the obvious. XP, events, experiential and exhibitions. MD, marketing and design. FX, TV, film, VFX and gaming. And then finally TD, which is technology and development. Each of the speakers on the panel today comes from varying backgrounds, actually. So we've got a good cross-section across a few of those things, and hopefully it will be quite interesting to hear what other industries are doing. Looking forward to hear some thoughts on that. And then just sort of finally on myself, I've been with Mustard for nearly 10 years, recruiting initially into architecture, but I now lead our global business operations. From a recruitment standpoint, AI is something that's already becoming more and more integrated into a variety of tools and systems that we use. But really more interested in hearing about what it's like from the creative side rather than the recruiting side, but hopefully have some insights to add to that. So if we go into some intros for some people, so if I just get you all to say who you are, where you're based, what industry you work in, and maybe briefly about how big a role AI currently plays in your day-to-day role, I sort of suppose. I think we're just waiting on Thais still, so hopefully she can join us in a minute. But if we could start with you, Brad.
I've sort of got a background in film, TV, games, sort of etc. Worked in various places around the world. Spent time in DreamWorks over in California, so did a bunch of feature animation. And then spent quite a number of years in VFX for high-end TV and film. Primarily, I've been a creative, but I've tended to get frustrated with the tools. So I then have to learn how to write my own tools. And I've tended to focus on the front end of the creative process, so not the final pixels, the slow iterative process. My passion has been more the front end, where we're sort of iterating quickly and exploring lots of creative ideas. So when I set up my own company a few years back, we started looking at ways to just totally change workflows using gaming engines, HoloLenses, tablets. And then as AI started to become more accessible, as the GPUs, etc., picked up a few years back, that was the next obvious sort of mechanism where we could look for, I'm always looking for 10 times speed ups. If you don't get 10 times, that's fine, but that's sort of the starting point. So that's where I've spent the last 2 to 3 years, I think, is focusing on speed ups for creative pipelines using AI.
Thanks very much, Brad. Thais has just joined us, I think. So if I could get you, Thais, just to say who you are and where you're based in the world, and a little bit about AI and how what role that plays in your day-to-day.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Thais Monjean. Sorry for joining late. Of course, someone had to have issues with their computer, so I'm joining from my phone. So I'm heading up strategy at an agency called Born Group. So the link to AI actually is that from a strategic standpoint is starting to be more and more important to help our clients with this issue, just because, I think there's a, big buzzword. It's quite gray, like I think for a lot of our clients, like what that entails and what they should do about this. So basically we're there to, I think, clarify a little bit how it can support their business and also how it can help future-proof their brand strategy, etc. So that's, I would say like my take on the topic.
Great, thank you very much. Sam?
Oh yeah. So I'm an application specialist with AHMM, where I've been in their digital design group for a couple of years. Essentially, I'm employed as expert knowledge on a variety of design softwares. I kind of work as their residential computational designer, although I try and avoid kind of getting tied too much to that term. I have a big focus on interoperability. And kind of previous to AHMM, when I was working with Grimshaw and kind of continued through with AHMM, a big focus on kind of digital design systems, how technology can kind of make our processes more efficient, optimize things that we do in our day-to-day. I think I like to see AHMM as quite an early adopter for these kind of things. We're always trying to keep an eye out for the latest technology. AI is obviously like a massive thing at the moment, but we've been working with that for probably the better part of a year, just kind of in the early iterations of it, and have kind of got ourselves onto a few early access kind of trials of some of the AI and machine learning tools. That's about me.
Great stuff. Thanks, Sam. Clemens?
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Clemens Wangerin. I'm based in Liverpool in the UK, and I've been in the games industry since the early 90s. So for the past 30 years or so, I've been exposed to one form of AI or another, if you like, in the context of games. I currently work as a independent consultant in that space, but spent the last 10 years or so firmly in that innovation space, combined with other enabling technologies like VR and AR, and just really exploring the implications of the use of things like machine learning and large language models on not just the creative process, but also the user experience in particular, and then sort of combining that with other enabling technologies. And so, hoping to bring some unique perspectives from that area into the conversation today.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. And then finally, Thomas.
Hi everyone. My name's Thomas Miller. I run an architect's practice called Miller Howard Workshop. We're based in Stroud in Gloucestershire. Similarly, I've had a really keen interest in kind of tech and the overlaps of tech in the creative industry and architecture. Got very into virtual reality when that first came out and integrated it into our practice. Also the use of kind of drones and photogrammetry for building up models of a site and combining that with Unreal Engine and some of the kind of games development software. In 2020, over lockdown, I actually got access to GPT-3 from OpenAI, so I've been playing around with that for 4 years now. It's kind of fascinating what it can provide. More recently, we've also set up a startup called Lived In that aims to connect landowners with people who are wanting to build their own house. And so for that, we're doing a lot of coding and using sort of AI tools every kind of 10 minutes really for that, and also integrating those tools into our workflow in terms of analysing planning permissions and appeal decisions for planning applications.
Great. And are you also, I think you've also been involved in, sorry if this is a bit presumptive, but teaching with the RBA as well, running a little course on AI?
Yes, I forgot to mention that I've this year's CPD course on AI I delivered, which was a challenge because we actually put that together almost kind of 9 months ago now, and in terms of AI, 9 months is a very long time.
Changed a lot, yeah. Great, good, okay. Yeah, thank you everybody. That's great. So we'll just do a quick overview of just some stats to framework a conversation, I suppose. And then we'll just jump into a bit of a discussion. So, hopefully, as you can see on your screen, a good point there raised by Thomas in that looking for up-to-date stats on AI, credible stats, is pretty hard because obviously everything moves on so quickly. But there's a couple of ONS and gov.uk stats that we've got up here, which suggests that 15% of UK businesses across all industries use at least one form of AI. which represents nearly 500,000 businesses. The BICS showed that approximately 1 in 6 businesses are currently implementing at least one of the AI applications when they were asked about in this survey. And of those nearly 500,000, the breakdown is that nearly 40% of those are primarily developing it in-house. Vic and I spoke about this earlier. I think the word develop is probably slightly loose here in terms of how active people are actually sort of physically developing stuff. 40% buy an off-the-shelf solution, and the remaining 20% outsource AI development to external providers. And then finally, medium-sized firms were the most likely to develop AI solutions in-house. Nearly half of those did this compared to lower numbers in larger and smaller firms as well. So that sort of SME level proving to be maybe more self-adopters and the right kind of size to deal with that sort of growth. If we move on to sort of first framework then, so talking about the implementation of AI within businesses across the spectrum, and also the challenges and opportunities that represents. So, a couple of examples here. We've already talked about Adobe just prior to the call, but Adobe Firefly's generative fill abilities through to GPT's copywriting and everything in between. The creative industries are changing, but is it really for the better? So if we start around the first point, are there any specific areas within your industry where AI has made significant advancements or significant disruptions? Anybody keen to start us off?
I was just going to say, I think I always tend to look at, we've got the generative AI, which is, I think one of the big hype things, and that's having a lot of creating a lot of discussion. There's also, of course, the non-generative, the invisible AI that's running under the hood, which, to be honest, for me, is where most of the low-hanging fruit is. Most of the amazing sort of value and speed ups are. The generative AI, I think, at least in sort of my sort of side of the industries, it's having impact on conceptual work. So just generating initial ideas, and again, the generative fill and a lot of the sort of auto roto and those sorts of things, they're quite interesting. But where it still struggles, and I think this is the biggest issue, a lot of the times with the generative AI, you kind of get what you get. And if you try to put control nets and various methodologies over the top to start to art direct tiny pieces, which is always the problem in our industry, it's easy to create something. It's the 1,000 notes that you get that need to individually be tweaked independent of others, where at the moment, most of the AI tools are somewhat useless. They're getting better, but the amount of money you spend fixing what the AI made for you in a second, a lot of times it costs more to fix it than if you just go back and build the damn thing from scratch yourself. Again, that's the case for an experienced, well-trained artist. If you're looking at someone who does not have those years of skills, then yeah, the Gen AI tool is going to get you something that you probably won't get. But it's anything that goes in front of clients tends to have, at least at the moment, limited use cases where the Gen AI is just going to be an awesome solution.
Yeah, I think we're going to hear a similar sort of theme from that. Clemens, do you want to jump in there?
So I think firstly, just to echo what Brad said right at the beginning, it's, specifically about the generative fill capabilities. I think absolutely right. The iterative aspect of it is one of the many limitations of the tool and the sort of actual production process. Conceptually in games, it's used to quickly, certainly speed up that part of the process. In terms of actually using it in production, that's a whole other minefield. And I think they're not sure whether there's anybody yet who's really sort of embraced it in that regard, because it's ultimately all about the provenance of the data used to create, these capabilities. And so, I think from that point of view, it's really interesting to see that aspect. But AI has been, so around for such a long time that it's just in some ways the large language models and everything that's generating all the attention, if you like. It's a bit like other hypes. We've had the metaverse not that long ago and stuff. And so I think there's one thing just to kind of everybody just to take a moment to just observe what's happening. I think that the question really is, yes, there's a lot of change, but is it really permanent? And I think what we're already finding is people are deploying these technologies or rushing to deploying these technologies and then realizing, it's actually counterproductive, and it's not producing persistently and consistently the results or the upside that's seen. It's just one of those. We're still in that sort of period now where everything AGI is around the corner, and there's a lot of you can tell there's a lot of people who have interest in this space, attracting a lot of attention. I think it's just worth keeping in mind that this is just another off-ramp of what AI is capable of delivering. We have computer vision, all these other technologies that are, equally astounding, exist. And, things like large language models are not just, the be-all and end-all, as it were.
In terms of that point on being able to actually use it to deliver something to a client, as opposed to just using it to generate iterative ideas from a design point of view, perhaps maybe Thomas or Sam, from an architecture point of view, could jump in.
Yeah, I mean, at AHMM, it's been picking up speed. I think we tend to have, kind of going back to what Clemens was saying, there's a lot of interest from the architects into jumping on to the next piece of tech that they see. You see these things kind of on LinkedIn, on kind of all around the internet. So we quite regularly get kind of requests for, I've seen this tool, can we use it? Can we use this, that? So, and kind of coming back to it, a lot of them, we found are kind of wrappers of Stable Diffusion or kind of Midjourney for these generative design things. But I mean, the current favorite, I think, is Visoid, which is a Stable Diffusion wrapper that also uses ControlNet to kind of give a slightly more surgical control over the outputs, which is something I think we've kind of found really interesting. Is I think there's different names for it. You kind of call it like prompt craft or like prompt whispering with these generative design tools, where you might have a vision in your head, but unless you can articulate that to this generative platform, you're never really going to get the result that you want. So we've kind of landed in this. I think it's quite a good place to be, because we're open to the architects using these tools, and free trials, absolutely. If there's a license for a team, then sure, we can get that kind of put on onto the projects. And then you have this kind of situation where the generative side of AI is becoming this kind of like collaborator with the conceptual design process, where we can iterate and ideate through hundreds of variations of a scheme using these kind of Stable Diffusion wrappers, and then can actually take that further. If pre-AI, we'd be using something like Enscape or Twinmotion to kind of generate these, decent renders, not as higher quality as like a full kind of visualization specialist. But you can kind of hit something a bit closer to the mark using these generative AIs, and then kind of go through this sort of like post-production of, bringing it into Photoshop, tweaking it. And now, of course, that also has a layer of generative design to it as well, where you can kind of, there's I think kind of quite a fun example has been people, right? Like people within the context of your render. In Enscape, you can kind of drop people in, or in Twinmotion, you can kind of drop people in, but sometimes, it almost looks like a cardboard cutout of a person. Whereas now you can kind of use these generative tools to actually get something in that, it's almost reaching the point of, the lighting is correct, things like that. I think that will kind of continue to advance. There's still a little bit of, I guess, like uncanny valley when you create people specifically with AI. A couple of extra fingers or missing eye or something like that. But even if you look at kind of just, I think it was end of last year maybe, when Midjourney version 5, and now we're on Midjourney version 6, and you can actually see the evolution of kind of how these things look, and they're just increasing in quality as we go on.
Yeah, great. Thomas?
I personally think that this is a huge revolution. It's kind of like on the scale of the internet being invented, and this is going to change. AI with large language models are going to change everything. too am a bit skeptical about the generative AI stuff at the moment. Like we play around with it, but it is just play at the moment, and trying to kind of funnel it into creating kind of useful content is often difficult. But I think there's also a risk that, like, whenever you speak to someone, they kind of think that it's useful for lots of other industries, but don't think that it can kind of be revolutionary in their own industry. And I don't know quite what that says, whether it's because we have those expertise and so we can see that it's the naivety of what it's producing, or whether we're reluctant to admit that these things are kind of starting to match what we're able to do. Personally, I've found it's actually with the coding that I've found the most use for it. And when I'm coding, I'm using it every 5 minutes to write code. And I'd say I'm on the sort of region of about 10 times more productive working alongside AI when coding, which is an enormous kind of level of productivity leap. And it's to the extent that if sometimes the kind of it's down and I don't have access to it, or the internet's not there, suddenly I'm much slower again at that particular task. And I think coding is like this kind of pinnacle of what it can achieve, because it's so pure in terms of a kind of maths, and there's also a lot to train it on the internet in terms of coding reviews. But I think in time it's going to affect all knowledge work in a similar way, which is both kind of really exciting and terrifying. And I also think these things, if you look at the internet, the internet, I'm not quite sure when it was born, but I kind of somewhere around the mid 80s, early 90s, and yet it takes 10 years or so to really sort of work out how that's useful. And I think we're probably going through a similar thing with these large language models, of trying to work out where the use is. And it's probably going to be in areas that we haven't even conceived of yet. And I find that really exciting.
Certainly in terms of increasing productivity, that's super useful. Thais, where do you guys sit in terms of adoption and advancements and that kind of thing?
So I think to answer this question, actually, I think what I was interested in as well was like the way you actually phrase the question itself, because you say basically, is AI really, helping change things for the better? And I think there's kind of like this implication of like, AI, is it good or bad? Like, should we be threatened or not? Especially for the creative industries. I think one aspect that is interesting, and I think actually like Thomas in his example was kind of like underlying this as well, is that I think it's more of a tool, and I guess like what makes it like good or bad or better or worse is really like the usage that we're making of it. The way I see it is that, and I think at Born, like the way we conceive it is more as a kind of like exoskeleton that is just going to reinforce our capabilities for what we're already doing. So for instance, like at Born, like we're really specializing in helping our clients optimize like I think like the content strategy, notably for e-commerce. So for anything that is linked to like auditing the content, reviewing whether like it's optimized for AI readability, from a technical perspective as well, like making sure that it's optimized like for machine customers, trying to see like how we can help like improve, accelerate like the workflows, etc. I think it's a tool that is amazing for us, but more in the sense that like it gives us a way like to just accelerate things, and it's a bit of a shortcut. So for instance, like when you're in an ideation process, like and you're like brainstorming, etc. I think the usage of AI, it's not necessarily like going to link you to better ideas necessarily, but I think like the fact of integrating it is just like helps you to get to the point a little bit quicker, basically. So it's just, I think for me, the way it's really affecting us in terms of our business is in terms of like the time it allows us to save, which like is huge, and I think like in terms of like the data is able to process. So again, like it's just I think like amplifying whatever we could do on our own, and in this respect, I think it's actually making things a little bit better, I would say.
Good, thank you. Just wondered if there's any. We kind of spoke a little bit around challenges in terms of actually being able to produce deliverable material to present to clients, and how useful it actually is from that point of view at the moment. Is there any other kind of challenges or real areas of problems that you think you found it's causing in your businesses at the moment? Anyone have anything to shout up on that? Brad, I think you're wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, I was going to say I don't know. It's probably not actually addressing that specific question as much, but it's just sort of, I think, and it goes to a little bit of what Tace was saying there about if you're trying to rely on it as a way for potentially less trained, less skilled artists to generate final content, there's going to be a lot of disappointments there. But I think what we're looking for is that, and I liked her exoskeleton sort of analogy, it's that augmentation is where the big wins are. You take a person's creativity, that's why you hired them, that's why the clients like them, and you want to augment that so they can create quicker. And I think, again, it's not so much, to me at this stage, the Gen AI type stuff where the massive wins are, but all the things that basically allow the creative to spend their time being creative. Because my experience, because I sort of, I do creative work, but I also write tools. When I work at different places, I'm lucky enough to work in lots of places, and again, VFX and feature animation, it's insanely complex pipelines. But what I've tended to find, because I'm a bit anal about that, the actual amount of time that I'm spending being creative is somewhere between 10 to 25% most of the time. 75 to 90% is spent hunting, trying to find things, get bits to clip together that don't quite work, checking things in and out, finding missing something, broken something. So 75 to 90% of my time, I'm being paid to be creative. I'm not being creative at all. I'm doing housekeeping. So, just in that area of trying to increase that, not to 100%, let's just get over 50%. But you're starting to look at multiples of more productivity. And I think from that angle, there's just so much that AI can do for us that there's not going to be, artists aren't going to be hating on that. You just ask them what the big list of things that just waste their time when they wish they could be creative, and use AI to fix that. And it's a win-win. People make more money, clients are happier, artists pulling, I pulled all my hair out working with these tools. So, I don't want other people to go through that.
Thanks, Fred. In terms of that point, I'm wondering if, sort of Thomas, you touched on it, as someone who, you use this and you obviously undeniably do become more productive when, for example, coding and relying on prompts to help deliver code in a quicker fashion. How do we think it impacts the sort of graduate and junior level talent coming into a design role where perhaps they're relying on this kind of technology from day one? Do we think that they will learn less or more slowly if there's an over reliance on AI as they sort of start in their professional careers, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really interesting. I think there's a lot, obviously, like for obvious reasons, there's a lot of nervousness around AI, and from everyone, really. I think from clients, from graduates, from people who've been kind of in the profession for a long time, and I'm sure some of that is kind of for good reason. But I think I don't think we've really got to grips with kind of how to use this yet. And I heard a company the other day who's actually banned the use of AI in the practice because they were more junior people were starting to produce rubbish with it, and so they were kind of using it, thinking, well, I can get away with just using this and almost passing it off as my own. And obviously, there's a certain look, or you can kind of read it in the text to see whether something's been generated by AI. So I think just that simple thing again of saying, well, I'm going to replace what I used to do with AI and just let AI do it is seems to be a theme that everyone's talking about, is kind of not at the moment something that can happen, and maybe that will never happen. But yeah, I think going on to talk about those productivity gains, another thing that we've used it for is reading appeal decisions. So we're really interested in looking at self-build appeals within the planning system, and there's maybe kind of 2,000 appeals of self-builds. And we want to know in those self-builds what weight was given to the fact that it was self-build. Was self-build a determining factor in the appeal? Now I can give all 2,000 of those appeals to an AI overnight, and it can read them all and summarize them all and take out the information that's needed from those appeals. Now that's not something I would have ever given anyone to do, to read 2,000 planning appeals. Maybe it means we're not using a planning consultant to do that, because we're able to do that in-house now and get that out. What we're finding is the results of that aren't perfect. So if you find those appeals using the AI to kind of read them, if you then go in, sometimes it's misinterpreted them, but it's a very good first pass, and vastly increases that time spent. So I think there's a really interesting thing of how do we use this in an imaginative and creative way. And if you use it in a very dumb way and just kind of expect to just instantly have it solve kind of questions, and I think that's going to be it's going to rubbish in, rubbish out. But if you use it in an intelligent way, in the right task, I think you can get really great results.
Yeah, I like that word of prompt craft. I think that's a nice way of doing it. Okay, we're going to need to move on to the next bit, although Clemens, I'll come to you shortly because I know you had your hand up. So it sort of links into what we were just saying there in terms of the ethics in and around implementation. We've got a quote here from Duncan Crabtree, who is the president of the chief negotiator for the Screen Actors Guild of American Federation of TV and Radio Artists, which is that the creative industries are one example of an area where if we don't have that kind of human-centered approach to the implementation, we run the risk of losing the heart and soul of the creative industries, and that's their whole reason for being, which I think is possibly the crux of the main reason why there is any pushback at all, is that people feel like it's losing that human element of everything that we do. And then obviously the obvious question is, is AI going to take your job? That sort of really base level overview, but specifically in terms of talking points, as it becomes more involved in the creative process, what considerations are there that we should look at and that AI developers should keep in mind? Clemens, I know you had your hand up previously, but is there anything you could jump in with that sort of question?
Yeah, I think it links a little bit to what you were asking before about how it impacts entry-level jobs. And I mean, at the moment, we're in that honeymoon period. Young people who are at the beginning of the industry are exposed to these tools at the same time as the industries in many ways, and they're public tools in many ways. So they're learning about them at the same time. Give it another 5 years, and it's not AI that's going to take your job. It's people who know how to use these tools, and to know how to use them well, and to know how to get the best out of them. And I thought originally it's all about the prompt engineer, but I mean that's long been that sort of level of control has become a lot more specialized than seemed initially the case. But I think I think for young people, you certainly need to need to be aware of these tools. You need to use them. You need to know what they're capable of and keep track of them. But the fact is, AI, when I think of the impact that it will have in its very many guises in all sorts of different industries, of course, is good. But even though a computer can now beat a human at chess, we've not stopped playing chess or poker or Go. there is an element of the human spirit that creativity will always lend to the process. And I think, these things, like any technology and emerging technologies, you need to be aware of them, especially if you're early on in the career, especially if you're a business, with a lot of data. And that's been a recurring theme already, is that you get the best results if you have a really good model that's trained on really good data. And I think you made a reference about SMEs being most of the sort of innovators in that space right now. Well, we're not going to have massive disruption until somebody in that space has proven that what they are, what the results that they're seeing are sustained and they're scalable and all the rest of it. And that will happen in whatever time frame you want to put on that. But I think we're still very early in where people have everybody is sort of going, oh, what's happening over there? And it looks really exciting and there's lots of potential in it. Again, we've seen all that before with other recent emerging technologies. It won't be the last time. I'm fairly certain of that. There'll be other advances, not just in the field of Gen AI and LLMs, but in other areas where we're going to, again, get a bit of whiplash almost and go, oh, what's that shiny thing over there? And, that might lead to more client work because they want to see how that impacts their business in the future. But I think fundamentally, have good creative skills and know how to use technical tools really well, I think is a good combination for any young person looking to be in a career, and for anybody to look to, make sure that they've got, get something out of the sort of opportunities that will exist.
Yeah, for sure. No, great. Sam, I wonder if we could come to you on I suppose ethics and I suppose possibly in reference to that conversation we started about Adobe before the call as well, and how people with access to this data use it sensibly, and what we're giving over to people, I suppose.
And securely, right? Yeah, I mean, I kind of have the view that a large part of the kind of ethics of how AI fits into our lives sits with the client side and the kind of developers of the AI themselves, right? That I was kind of reading this interesting article about like the conflict between capitalistic endeavor and ethics, right? Where the purpose of a company is to prioritize profit, right? And at what point on the scale of prioritizing profit does that start to leave the kind of overlapping Venn diagram of what is ethical in an AI? I kind of see like GPT-4, right? ChatGPT-4 is an enhanced version of a large language model that currently sits behind a subscription paywall, has a higher fidelity of information, of data, and so on, compared to the openly accessible kind of free version of that. And how that kind of might start to tailor, if a client is going to turn around and kind of from the creative industry and kind of say, well, why would we pay an architect to develop conceptual design for us when I could just go onto Midjourney, I can type in a few prompts and I can say, make it look like, I think like Zaha Hadid as a prompt, right? Like style Zaha Hadid is like one of the most used prompts for architecture, right? So, why as a client might I approach Zaha Hadid and say, I want to design this when I could go in there. But I think kind of as Brad and Clemens were saying, like the driver behind that will be the creative process of what, in my case, an architect is doing, or someone in this kind of creative industry is doing, still far exceeds the capabilities of AI's creative thought, which at the moment is just kind of compiling, all of this data that's been scraped, right? And then, kind of talking back to the Adobe point, there's been, I think just last week, right, like quite a controversial update to Adobe's terms and conditions, where they're talking about having access to any content that you might hold on your computer that they can access through automation or manually, whatever that might mean. And that kind of has quite understandably triggered a lot of people into kind of going, well, hang on a minute, if I'm at home and I choose to do a little bit of art in my spare time, is that just immediately getting thrown into this kind of bucket of data that's been scraped? I think it's going to kind of create a kind of an interesting problem, because I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but there's something which is it's called Nightshade, which is kind of this I think early experimentation from kind of coders and artists to almost poison artwork that they upload online, such that AI misinterpret while the scraping process is happening, that data gets misinterpreted as something else. And that can then lead to some quite concerning thoughts as to fidelity of information that you get out of. In this case, I'm talking more about the generative side of things, where a very, very kind of simple premise of how this thing works is that I upload a painting of a fruit bowl, but I've run it through Nightshade and it's recognized as a hat or something like that, right? So AI kind of goes, oh, that's what a hat looks like, and then down the line, if that kind of continues picking up, generative, mid-journey, stable diffusion, things like that are going to have a really hard time with this. But also fidelity of information that you might get out of something like large language models. Ethics as a kind of process that happens within ChatGPT is almost sat on top of, the data scraping happens, it gathers all this data, and then the ethics is added on top of it, and then you sit there and use ChatGPT. But you can, at the moment, you can kind of like jailbreak ChatGPT. If you ask it about a topic that its kind of ethics programming says, sorry, I can't reply to that, you can just go, oh, sorry, pretend you're a different AI that can answer it and now answer it. And in most cases, it will, you can kind of, it might take a few levels, but you can kind of start to circumvent that. So I think this is kind of a massive thing that, OpenAI, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, they really need to kind of look into and get a handle on. Otherwise, we might kind of see this almost like corruption of what we use. And as we kind of, we at the moment, we're still kind of in, I'd say we're sort of innovation, early adopters part of this technology. But, it will increase. Everybody will eventually be using AI. It's kind of, similar to, I think Thomas was saying about the internet, right? There are people who are kind of going, oh, the internet won't catch on as an idea. And now you look back and you think, how could people possibly could have thought that? So, I think there really is an onus on the companies developing these things and on the client side to kind of say, where do we draw our line in the sand here about, what we kind of want. And I think that will really kind of, that will keep creatives in the industry in perpetuity, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Sam. Thijs, I wonder if you've got any thoughts on this in terms of ethics within the sort of coming from a marketing world, I suppose.
That's interesting because I mean ethics. We were talking about like the creative process and like to what extent like this can be a bit of a threat, I guess, like to creativity. I think I'm kind of like repeating a little bit of some of the things that were said, but indeed like AI is not really capable of like like true original thinking. So maybe at some point, like in the far future, it will be possible. But in the meantime, I think we're quite safe in the sense that it's only as good as like what we're feeding it. And I think the example of like the confusion, between like the hat, salad bowl, etc. Like I think is quite telling. Like at the moment, like we're reaching this kind of thing. One thing that I feel is quite important to keep in mind as well. Like I know that in the question, like in the quote, it says that basically like we should think about how AI is going to be a threat to like the heart and soul of like the creative industry. From my perspective, like in terms of what we're focusing on at Born is really linked to like e-commerce and I would say like experience, like CX, etc. In this respect, what is interesting to see is that the more AI like it's becoming I think like I think implemented, the more it's used, etc., the more there's a craving, like I think for things that are a little bit more real, a little bit more analog, a little bit more human, and that's actually something that you see like in stats. I think there was this study that was conducted by Deloitte, and they said that basically like. I think it was like 59% of all consumers. They said that they felt that they had lost touch with a human element in terms of like the customer experience, and that they were really craving more human interaction and stuff. So I think like it's almost like if anything, like I feel like rather than threatening the human heart, soul aspect of thing. I feel like almost like by contrast, the expansion of AI might actually like just reinforce anything that is more human, anything that is more disruptive. So personally, I don't really see it as a threat, but more as potentially like something that is going to trigger a new way of being more human.
Yeah, nice, great. Thomas, quickly, and then we'll move on to the final one.
Yeah, I really like that idea that it's actually creating more of a craving for the more human thing, and I can really see that. I've got a friend who actually over the weekend was writing an application for applying for a fellowship, and it's really interesting in that his application ended up being quite strange in a way, because there's almost a thing of like everyone now can write in a way that sounds very professional by sending it through ChatGPT, but actually in writing something that had a more human and strange side of it cuts through and maybe will make that application kind of come to life more. So I really like that idea that actually it might draw out more of our humanness.
We've sort of spoken about it here as I wonder how long it will be before we're recruiting for a business whose USP is they are 100% human, no robots involved, no AI involved, and that's the thing that people really want to work for. It's not happened yet, but we'll wait and see. Right. Shall we move on to the final point then, in terms of where we think this might go, and what's next? I suppose we're already dealing with something that's very much in early stages of adoption, but what's next on the agenda for AI, and how might it continue to impact businesses that you work in, and sort of more generally the landscape of business globally? Any hands up for giving us a start on this? Clemens, you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think, again, in the games part of the creative industries, the sense I get is that people are generally relaxed about the impact of it. It's seen as, yes, another exciting technology that's on from a long list of really already quite magnificent AI-enabled technologies like computer vision that we talked about, and machine learning that we touched on. And it wasn't that long ago that people thought those were all the things that were going to change the world. But I think specifically about some of the new stuff we've seen in terms of how it's implemented. I think certainly in the terms of personalization of products, it's going to play a huge role in gaming experiences, having non-player characters, NPCs driven by technologies like ChatGPT. We've already seen early prototypes of that. It's going to be, really incredible, because it's going to allow you to build relationships with characters that you've come across in a role-playing type setting. And don't forget, some people are putting in 100+ hours easily into those types of games. Not the mass market, but there are significant player bases for games like Fallout, and they're sort of seeping into popular culture, of course, in TV and other forms of media. But I think what we haven't seen yet in games is a real sort of sense of output. Yeah, where is generative AI, for example, going to help? Possibly first in genres like puzzle games. You could see something, match 3 type games that creatively don't really need wonderful, beautiful hand-drawn artwork. They need nice looking artwork. And again, it would go back to provenance of data. And I think, again, that's been touched on a few times, where the quality of the data that you use to train the model needs to be impeccable. And I think, once and curated and cleared by legal, and if you're going to use it in public facing work and all the rest of it, and that's still going to take significant amounts of time before we see that. So the real impact, we're not going to know for a while. It's clear it's having an impact already. You see people on all ends of the scale saying, "Oh, it's going to cost 90% of jobs, and we're all AGI is going to be horrible." And again, we've seen that similarly with other enabling technologies. I think the sort of the steps to be taken to foster collaboration, more funding is always going to be good. I think there is already funding in that space from UK government. Usually they do require collaboration with other SMEs. You've already touched on SMEs being the most active currently in that space. And I think that's really where maybe the sort of most near-term opportunities are from that point of view. I think it's clearly here to stay. It's not going to be the last time we're going to see amazing AI, guaranteed. But there is still, we're still early stage, still a long road to go to full, adoption, as it were.
Yeah, great, thank you. Brad, what do we think in the sort of production world?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I again look, continuing on that sort of approach of AI serving as an assistant, an augmenter, a co-pilot to the skills of an artist. What I think is really interesting at the moment, if because a lot of people will have come via LinkedIn, people that you can see on there. I think Martin, I think it's Eberlung, might be his name. I strongly encourage people to look at experiments he's doing with workflows where it's basically, he is originating work at a simplistic level, maybe in something like Dreams, it could be in Photoshop, it could be any number of 3D, 2D packages. He's effectively creating something very quickly and roughly, and then running that a live capture of that sort of viewport or screen through something like Krea, which he's feeding it style guides and prompts, and it is up-resing and doing all sorts of detail and interpretation, but he's driving it. And I think that is a very simple model. And this is super early days, and he's very upfront. This is primitive stuff, but this is the worst version we're ever going to see. But that's where you're augmenting a creative, and I think it's something that came up at an event I was at last week with education sort of side of the industry. There's an argument to say that there will be more benefit going future in people doing learning creative skills that are much more in the traditional sense of what degrees are about. You learn about composition, form, color, light, and I'm just talking purely from a creative sense now. You learn to be creatively critical and to have creative perceptions of things, so that Gen AI allows anyone with no talent to generate a million fruit salad sort of pap of bland, tasteless material, but people with creative ability can identify which of those show something promising, what elements of those are worth developing, and which of them, 99%, you just quickly get rid of and don't let anyone see them because they are rubbish. But it's that creative ability, again, I think, going to this point of going back to being the value of the human input. In the end, that's what people are paying for. That's what clients want. They don't want generic crap that anyone can produce, because if their 5-year-old son can produce it, why are they paying you to do it? And it's that distinguishing factor. That's the value proposition. So there's arguments to say this can help actually elevate the creative skill set rather than make a lot of the training and learning about learning tool sets and all the different bits of software and how to check things in and out, and how not to delete layers and all the nonsense that an artist really shouldn't be focusing on. So I think it's the world of artists should get a lot better in theory, I think, with AI.
Great, thanks, Brad. Sam, I wonder how far away are we from it, an AI model building a Revit model and it going to site without any intervention?
Well, I mean, that's quite hard to say, because even if you look back a year ago, right, like it's the Mid-Journey example of, humans with extra fingers and arms and stuff. And today it's, a year later is 1,000 times better. Yeah, I mean, so there was already last month, like Autodesk have shared Project Bernini, which is kind of this like text or image to like 3D mesh models that can kind of also do like hollow topology and stuff like that. I think it's early days, but I do think that will be the next kind of big jump forward, will be kind of 3D like object-based generation. I mean, I do think like, we joke about it in the office sometimes about like Clippy. If anybody remembers, kind of like, Microsoft Word, little paperclip guy in the corner who was like, hey, it looks like you're trying to, write a CV or whatever. When it comes to using like Revit, right, which is, the design tool we use primarily at the moment, and you'll be kind of drawing up in Revit, and it's going to pop up and kind of go, oh, hey, I can see that you're working on like a door package, and just to let you know, these doors don't meet regulations, or you need to think about accessibility in this area, right? It will be this kind of like co-pilot to the design process. But I kind of, I quite liked, I think it was Brad that was saying earlier about, I mean, in my role, I'm there to be the kind of the overhead that deals with all of the complexities of how the software work and everything. But the architect is employed to be an architect, to be that creative thinking, right? So the more kind of percentage of their time that we can give them to do that creativity, the better. And that's kind of, I think, where these kind of integrated large language models, kind of integrated 3D model generation, it's almost like writing an email and it asks you, oh, hey, do you want me to just finish that last bit of the email for you? It'll be that kind of thing when you're working with these tools in future. And I actually think kind of, going back to, I think it was Thomas and Thais that were talking about it, where, there will almost like, there's value to the human side of this process, right? And like, it's kind of, there's like I think it was Ollie Thomas from Big maybe that was talking about it. Like if you go and get a coffee, you can now go and get coffee from these kind of artisanal, coffee shops, and these people are seriously serious about it, and they make very good coffee, right? Now we've got these kind of tools coming into the creative spaces and kind of into the construction space. You might see kind of as we had before, where drawing a building previously was like an entire warehouse full of people sketching on drawing boards. Then you get AutoCAD and people can suddenly draw a bit faster. Revit, things get a little bit faster. You will see the size of teams necessary for projects really decrease because of the enhanced productivity. But that might kind of then give some onus more to smaller firms who can, and you kind of get this like, artisanal architecture where it's like this really kind of like human touch of, okay, we have, all this AI tools exist and stuff. I don't necessarily agree that completely saying, we're a human only, we're never going to be touching that. That's maybe a little bit too far, but, you're getting all of the benefit of our creativity, because we're optimized by these tools. We're not being replaced by these AI tools. They're just letting us do what we do best, better for you.
Yeah, great. It's interesting to whether or not the artisanal thing, in the traditional coffee sense, is the ones that will charge you twice as much for a cup of coffee. Does the artisanal architect charge twice as much, and therefore approaches the premium market, or is the premium market targeted by those AI assisted architects who are working at 10 times productivity? So whether or not which way it goes. We're going to, I think, move on to some Q&A now, because we're very much near the end of our slot. If anyone needs to duck out, please do let us know. But I think we've had some comments chucked in, so we'll run through these. It's from someone at Mustard. Clemens referred to data quality being inherent to the success of AI implementation, and Thomas referring to how he uses AI for coding optimization. Question to the whole panel: do you think that other technical roles will be born into creative industries to support this adoption of AI, such as data scientists, data engineers, and software developers? Clemens, do you want to have a look at it, seeing as you're mentioned initially?
Yes. So I think it's a short answer. Yes, there will be new technical roles. I think we're already seeing, that point you just made there before, that sort of grappling with, where is the added value that we still bring. Games went through that when everything went free to play, and we're like, well, if everything's free, how do you make money? And so, it's not the first time that sort of question has been asked. And I think going to this particular question, there are roles. Data, the ability to work with data is going to be continue to be incredibly important. It already is in the game space. We've already seen data analysts and certainly behavioral analysis of, sort of doing predictive analysis of data. Again, all of these use a form of algorithm, which you can argue is a form of AI to work with. So again, but then it's the sort of interpretation of that. That's the human element again, and I think that's really where you're gonna find a lot of value that you can add, and where roles like that will increasingly, I think, we'll see growth, where especially large organizations that already have a lot of data will need teams increasingly that they want to have internally to actually start developing those processes and then actually linking them into corporate development. And we're seeing some of that. The large accountancy firms, for example, are playing around, if I can sort of say it like that, with AI models and stuff. And, do you build it, do you roll your own, or do you get something in? And we're going to see some interesting deals being done in this space in the years to come. And I think what's interesting about currently on the AI front, just with what you're saying again about SMEs, again, that would seem to indicate that M&A activity-wise, you're going to see something in the next few years where people will want to add capabilities. And in the first instance, most of that will mean they want teams of people. So, again, I think we're going to see a lot of growth in that area of, people getting to grips with data, realizing where they can generate data, already have data, and then building teams around that sort of capability.
From Rita, do we know how AI is going to be used in a BIM environment? So sort of architecture specific one, I suppose. Any chances to AI being help us to be able to help the production of construction information? I suppose, Sam, is probably most relevant for you in the sense of, and interestingly on the previous question in terms of will there be new technical roles created? I suppose you're almost in that role, right? There aren't many architecture practices that specifically employ application specialists. You have to be of a certain critical mass, I suppose, to do that. But what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of touches similar to the previous question as well, right? Like my whole role at AHMM is there to be a technical software specialist. 20 years ago, that role wouldn't have ever existed. In 20 years' time, who knows what roles that, that's kind of something that gets thrown around a lot, right? Is, who's going to, there will be jobs in the future that exist that we can't even conceive of at the moment. In terms of AI being used in BIM environment, I mean, there are already tools out there that kind of help with production information. Off the top of my head, Evolve Labs use a piece of software called, or developing a piece of software called Glyph, which is kind of like a chat GPT powered design tool. So you can kind of say, hey, I need dimensions drawn up on sheets 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and it will kind of go away in the background. It'll take a moment to process it. I mean, that's not dissimilar, I suppose, to just kind of like programmatic overlays of, like I use Dynamo in a regular basis. That's a program overlay for Revit that allows me to kind of, effectively give the computer a series of instructions that it can complete a lot faster than I could if I was manually doing it. These tools do already exist. Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I guess, specifically from kind of a BIM side, BIM is just kind of, I guess, not only, but is partially metadata being added to geometry in your model. That again is something that you can kind of programmatically do with automation at the moment anyway. So stands to reason that, yeah, probably not too far in the future, we're going to have enhancements on things like Glyph, where you can kind of say, these are the regulations that I need my building to be kind of codified to. You hit go, and the AI will just run through, all of the doors, all of the walls, whatever, kind of depending on the requirement, I suppose, and kind of populate that stuff for you.
Yeah, great, cool. Thomas, any points on that question before we have another one?
I mean, I think there's this thing that whenever there's a big new kind of industrial, like technological revolution, I think it's often a mistake to think about the things it's going to replace that we currently do. And I think quite often what ends up being really exciting about a new technology is the new things it enables happening. And that's also a really difficult thing to get your head around because they're new things that haven't happened yet. But I personally, I think that so far the kind of digital revolution has affected things that we can calculate a lot, so kind of banking and anything that involves numbers and that someone can code. And I think what's going to be huge about large language models and AI is opening up kind of knowledge and knowledge work to the similar productivity gains. And so I think it's actually going to bring, I'm hoping it's going to bring non-technical people closer to being able to communicate with computers and get them to do what they want it to do, so that you can almost kind of instruct a computer rather than having to use code and be specialist in coding, be able to instruct computers more using natural language. Now, what that then opens up is kind of is incredible. I mean, maybe I've slightly dodged the question on the BIM, but I think that's what, I think that's what's potentially really exciting.
I think if just to chuck a recruitment hat into the mix here as well, it's interesting. There's a lot of talk about skills-based hiring, and how do we recruit for roles that don't really exist in the wider spectrum of things. So, a good example is, an application specialist, for example. There is only one other practice who might hire these people. So where are we going to find them from? How do we encourage clients to hire based on skills and potential rather than prior experience, which has always been a challenge, but will continue to do so. I think we always talk about when I was in school, someone told me that the 10 most popular careers right now didn't exist 10 years ago. So we're trying to teach people to work in a job that doesn't exist probably. So how do you give people the right education at really early stages to make sure that they have that long-term progression? Another question, if there is one. I suppose this is more sort of production side. So Brad, I would imagine this kind of falls into your remit, but how far are we from getting it to generative production?
Yeah, I think there's obviously with something for production use, there's levels of entry, and that's the big thing. That's the big question of what specific use case for what clients, and for what IP or something. So it's sort of at the moment, if you start at the top and work backwards from let's just say a sort of a less sort of anal control sort of process of analysis of all of these boxes that this 3D model needs to tick. At the moment, we're sort of, we're struggling for anything that's going to be articulated at feature film level, that especially if it represents a very valuable IP that clients own, where, that's not going to be something that you snap your fingers, press a button, and you've got something. But I think if we go down to the closer to the bottom of the spectrum, that's where we're starting to see, I think, the AI generated models starting to slowly climb that ladder of acceptable. And that's the thing. You start to look at things like background characters, and I'm just focusing on feature film for a moment. If they're what we'd always refer to as digi-doubles back there, if they're out of focus and they're not jerking around too much, that's probably going to be good enough. And again, you go to potentially sort of different types of spin-off ancillary content where you take something and make very low-res versions for some, minimal interaction, low-res experience. Again, AI models will probably be sufficient there. But I think it's, again, the devil's in the detail. Pressing a button and having a 3D model that pop out that can go full res on a 40-foot screen in a close-up with perfect deformations, we're a long, long way away. But if you're wanting to get something stylized, then it's starting to get closer. And again, the less demanding your use case is of that model, then that's all the low-hanging fruit that the generated models coming out of some of the software we've got now, they might be good enough. But, from a professional perspective, in our side of the industry, they're still pretty rubbish. You wouldn't want someone coming out of a course showing you that as a model they made. It's very specific use cases. You can get away with static stuff again. And if you, as I sort of recommend to people, if you're taking that and plugging into something where you can control overlay of detail that's being put in, then that will get you massively far, especially for static material where there are not deforming, articulating components. But if you can use it to get you 80% of the way, and then again with an AI assistant start to put detail over the top, then you'll sped up your workflow by maybe 80% overall or something. That's where the big wins are right now.
Great. Good. Okay, I think that's probably all we've got time for. We've run over by about 10 minutes. So, obviously could continue talking for much longer, which is great. And there's been some really, really interesting points that have come up across a variety of things. But if I could just say thanks to everyone for listening in. A copy of the presentation will be made available and shared to everyone who's been involved, so you'll be able to watch back on bits that you missed. But thanks to everyone who was involved from a panel point of view. It was some really interesting stuff. I'm sure we'll catch up separately after this, but yeah, hopefully some good sharing of thoughts and sharing of information, and hopefully everyone found that really useful. Thank you very much, and see everyone soon.